Welcome into the Locked On Knicks podcast. I'm Gavin Schall. Today I'm joined by Locked On Hawks host Brad Rowland to discuss the Dejounte Murray rumors. Are they true? And would he be a championship caliber fit in New York? We discuss that now on Locked On Knicks.
You are Locked On Knicks, your daily New York Knicks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
You are Locked On Knicks. We're about to get into a thrilling Dejounte Murray conversation. But before we do that, I wanted to remind you that today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. I want to thank you for making Locked On Knicks your first listen today and every day. We are available on every platform you could possibly imagine. If you want to see our smiling faces each and every day, be sure to tune in on YouTube and hit that notifications bell and that subscription button so you never miss an episode. If you're thinking, those guys, little ugly. You can subscribe on the podcast side of things. Just be sure to enable your auto download function so you never miss an episode there. But who's talking to you? I'm Gavin Schall, your favorite play-by-play broadcaster's favorite play-by-play broadcaster. I've been covering the NBA for 8 seasons now. I'm joined by someone with probably about triple the credentials, Brad Rowland, who does an incredible job as a news-breaking reporter on the Atlanta Hawks, covering the team for a variety of outlets, including, lucky for my purposes, Locked On Hawks. And we get into a wide-ranging conversation on Dejounte Murray's skill set, his declining defense, and why or why not he would make a good fit in New York. So without further ado, let's get into it with Brad right now. All right, guys, as promised, it's a Locked On crossover. I'm Gavin Schall of the Locked On Knicks podcast. He's Brad Rowland of Locked On Hawks, and we could only be talking about one thing: how much we love Trae Young. No, it's Dejounte Murray trade. Rumors abound on the Knicks' interest. I'm a little bit dubious in terms of just how interested the Knicks are, but they're certainly one of the teams in the conversation when you hear Dejounte Murray's name brought up. So, Brad, I think there's only one place to start. Like, how much of a certainty is it that the Hawks ultimately move off Dejounte Murray before this trade deadline?
I shudder to use the word certain on anything when it comes to trades. I'm sure you have experience with this too. Like, fans don't like it when I say this. Trades are hard to make. I know they're not hard to make in the trade machine, but as far as like all the things in play, ownership gets involved, all the sides. So I'm always a little bit lower than most people are on, even on intel wise. Like, if I hear something's like 90%, I'm going to go to 80%. It's one of those things. I think it's likely to happen that they move him. That's been reported out there. Woj just had that. I've heard the same. But what likely means is kind of a variable thing. So I think it's probably going to happen that they move him in the next 2 or 3 weeks before the deadline. But at the same time, things could always change if they go on a wing streak, if the owner gets involved, all those things. It could always pivot, but I'm pretty confident that he gets moved.
Gotcha. How would you summarize his year and a half on the Hawks? Because obviously it's not what Atlanta hoped for. And I had really high expectations when he was going to Atlanta. I was like, wow, what a move. Like, arguably top 3-4 defensive guard in the league, teaming up with Trae Young, his ability to get to the rim, Trae's shooting. It seemed like, if not a match made in heaven, a really clean fit between two really good players that was going to elevate Atlanta. Obviously, it hasn't quite worked out to that extent, though the individual production has clearly still been there for Dejounte. So why is Atlanta moving on?
Yeah, I think that the way you put that about, the year and a half or so, I think it's been underwhelming. It's not been calamitous. People, I think if you assume that the Hawks are probably going to trade him, you might think it's gone terribly. And I wouldn't actually say that as far as just what Dejounte has brought to the table and how it's fit together on offense. That was kind of the question. It was like, does the offense work? It's like you said, defensively, it was like, all right, this is going to help the Hawks, point of attack, etc. The big picture thing is that the Hawks are about 500 in the last year and a half. And if you told them that, they would have done the trade. I think that's pretty obvious. I'm not sure if they would admit that, but you don't trade 3 first-round picks to essentially be the exact same team as far as overall quality. The team dynamics have changed, but Murray's supposed to help them go to the next level, and they're still at the same level. So that's kind of just a very intuitive thing. As far as like how it's worked, I think Dejounte offensively has kind of grown a lot, to be honest with you. He's shooting the ball better than he ever has. That's a very positive thing. I don't think it's been like oil and water with he and Trae. They've not fit perfectly, but you've seen steps in the right direction with Quinn Snyder kind of using them together more often. The big thing is the defense, where I think the Hawks just kind of misevaluated what they were going to get out of Dejounte, and we can talk about that more, I'm sure. But he's not lived up to the billing on defense for sure. That I'm confident in. You can kind of talk about the nuances on offense. Having watched every minute of the Dejounte Murray era on defense, he's not been the guy they thought that they envisioned him being defensively, and it's not all on him either. I will certainly say that this is a bad defensive team outside of Dejounte Murray, but I think that's kind of the area that I would circle first. Be like, all right, the theory of it was basically pair with Trey, help the second unit offense, raise the level on offense, and also key help the point of attack defense, which the Hawks have struggled with a lot, and that second part just hasn't happened.
Yeah, that's what shocked me, because he was so good on that end in San Antonio and kind of physically overwhelming, and seemed to be someone who like loved playing defense watching him. And I think he's said stuff since, like, I forgot if it was DeMar DeRozan or you'd probably know this, Brad, but some player told him early in his career, like, hey, if you want to be on the floor to score, like you got to defend. And maybe it was to some extent a means to an end for him, because I don't think in his mid-20s that his like defense, and correct me if I'm off on this, maybe some injury I missed, but like it doesn't make sense that his defensive talent just fell off a cliff. And the fact that he's not as good, I mean, it feels like a priority thing, like how he sees himself as a player, and maybe just a little bit of a cultural thing. And not that like his last Spurs team was anything incredible on the defensive end of the floor, but just the years of infrastructure and pride on that end in San Antonio. And then you come and you see Trae Young, I mean, this year obviously giving a much better effort, but struggling. And you're like, man, why am I the star guard who has to do all this? I'm just as good as of an offensive player. But Brad, that's me guessing on from your perspective, actually having, to your point, watched every minute of Dejounte. What's been the issue for him on the defensive end in a Hawks uniform?
Yeah, I think it's a lot of those things that you mentioned kind of put into one. One thing is, it's not like a unique story that as a guy's offensive role in the league increases, his defense gets worse. That kind of happens a lot, honestly. It's not always sharp, but I mean, I think for the most part, I mean, you kind of struggle to find guys who have had their usage go to where his went at the end of San Antonio and where it's been in Atlanta, and have maintained their defense. A recent example of this, not the same position, but like a lot of whispers about Mikal Bridges' defense in Brooklyn, for instance. Like, he's not the same defensive player that he was in Phoenix now that he's carrying an offensive workload. And, it's not like a skill thing. It's just, maybe it's an energy thing, maybe it's a role thing, it's a mindset thing. Every guy is different. But, early in his career in San Antonio, he was a late first-round pick. He, to your point, had to earn it defensively. And I think he was kind of their defensive stopper early in his career. That was kind of how he got paid the first time around on the rookie extension, was like he was the third guard, kind of like fly around defender. And by the end, and look, I won't claim to have watched all of Dejounte's last season or two in San Antonio, because I don't cover the Spurs. But when I was doing research after the trade, guys that covered that team were like just kind of whispering to me like, hey, he's not quite the same defender he was a couple of years ago. So even by the end of San Antonio, it was kind of like, and by the way, it was understandable because he was carrying like a 30% usage rate, and like he was the only guy on that team pre-Wemby, you know what I mean? So it made sense, and the hope was a little bit less usage with Trey, pick it back up, and that just hasn't happened. And to defend Dejounte a little bit on his defense, like, it's kind of funny to say that out loud.
Yeah.
It's not a great role for him either. Like, I think he is best suited as a habit creator. He's always been best at that. He's a big time steals guy. He still gets steals, which I think covers up if you don't watch him every night for his defensive foibles. Like, he's got great hands. He's good anticipator, but he's not bulky at all. He's very skinny. He's not a strong defender. So against point guards, it's not as glaring as it is against wings. But if you're playing next to Trae Young, you have to defend wings sometimes. And they thought that they were going to get more out of him. And look, size-wise, he is 6'4", 6'5". He's not short for a point guard, but honestly, he's a point guard. And that is maybe we'll get into that on the Knicks front, where they have a guy that's not the same player as Trae Young, but kind of similar in some ways with Jalen Brunson. Like, the fit stuff there is kind of a question, but I do think that in general with his defense, it's perhaps effort-based. It's perhaps just keying on a defense. And I think that if you watch him play and play out, it can be maddening. And again, not alone. He gets beat on back cuts. His point of attack resistance is not the same as it used to be, and it's frustrating. I'm sure you notice this across the league. When he's dialed in for a quarter or something, you can see the guy that used to be there, and then the next quarter or the next half, it won't be there anymore. And part of that maybe is cultural with the Hawks, but even the advanced numbers, like, I don't know if you buy into those as much as some people do, but like, his EPM, all that stuff is way down in Atlanta. Part of that, again, could be team context, but the eye test matches it, and I think he's just not been that guy. And unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on if you're Dejounte Murray or not, his reputation around the league is still kind of sticky. Is like people just assume he's a good defender because he used to be a good defender. It's kind of like, especially with guards, I feel like reputation's very sticky. Like once you're proven to be a good defender, people think you're still a good defender whether you are or not. And I think he's kind of riding that a little bit in terms of like of the perception, because I'm sure you're getting this too from Knicks fans. When other teams ask me about Dejounte Murray, other teams fans, they're like, "Well, we know his defense is good." It's like, well, do we? I actually don't know that, having watched him for a year and a half. So it's interesting for sure.
All right, guys, we'll be back with Brad in just a sec to answer a very important question. Is Dejounte Murray actually a good fit in New York? And what would the similarities and differences be in the dynamic between him and Jalen Brunson compared to the failed one between him and Trae Young? We'll get into that in just a sec. But first, I want to take a moment to talk to you about our buddies over at FanDuel Sportsbook. The NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel. The NFL season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. I have to say it that way because it's a crazy number. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same-game parlays. You can find bets in the new Explore tab. Make a parlay in the Parlay Hub, the best way to find popular parlays, and more. Parlays are super, super fun. I like to just hit some of the regular over-unders, especially when I see one, no offense to our buddies over at FanDuel, that I think is a little bit egregious. The New York Knicks only 4-point favorites over the flailing Brooklyn Nets. Seriously, they have been struggling. The Knicks have been rolling. I know it's a crosstown rivalry. I could see it being a close game, but I think that 4-point over under is an insult. So I would lay some money down on your New York Knicks. If you agree with me or if you disagree with me, you can put your money where your mouth is by visiting FanDuel.com/lockedon and making your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. I feel like the same thing always happened with Steph Curry the opposite way, where everyone assumed he was a liability, and he got to a point where he was an average to like maybe even a slightly above average defender.
It does go both ways for sure.
Did it get better in the playoffs last year? Because I think from a Knicks perspective, that's my curiosity. Like, all right, let's just say we were in the second round, we were in the conference finals, and if the Knicks were going to pay a premium for that kind of upgrade, I think for me, the question would be like, all right, you don't want to defend the regular season. That's fine. Like, can you turn this up in the biggest moments and do it consistently? Or like, and I think it's something sometimes players themselves assume they can do. And it is something that's almost built by habit. And it's very hard to flick that on and off. But did you see it jump a level against the Celtics last year?
A little bit. I think, in general, almost everybody is more attuned in the playoffs defensively. And I think because he does have the physical tools, that's the one thing you can't manufacture in the playoffs is physical tools. Like at some point you have to have the goods. And I think that, again, it kind of depends on what you're asking him to do. Unfortunately, with Atlanta, you have to kind of put him on wings more often, or you're having him guard the #1 guy because you're trying to hide Trae. And that's a whole other discussion that we'll have another day. Actually, Trae's gotten a lot better defensively in a way. Kind of you mentioned about Steph, like Trae's not good. Don't get me. I'm not saying he's good. He's not, but he's no longer like the first percentile defender in the league like he used to be. And that is sticky too. But no, I think DeJounte can ramp it up. And I wonder, honestly, and I'll probably always wonder this if he gets traded, how much the lack of team success had to do with it. Because I feel like guys generally buy in more when they're winning. And that's not a DeJounte thing. That's an everybody thing. The vibes are better, and defense is sometimes about effort and execution and attentiveness, all that stuff. And I will always wonder if they had more success, would that have translated into more energy level or whatever it is and just fit overall. So I think in the Boston series, it was a tough matchup for him because Boston is big. Like he was having to guard Jaylen Brown. He was having to try to, it wasn't like he had somewhere to hide. So that's a little bit of a challenge, but maybe that'd be the case in New York as well. So I think he can do more. I'll kind of always believe that. Whether he's able to do that in a playoff series to where he used to be, I kind of think the old guy is gone, to be honest. Like the old first 3 years in his career stopper, I think that guy's probably gone. I think that he can be and probably would be better in another spot if he was just bought in and also used in a way that was like more fitting of his skill set, if that makes sense.
Gotcha. All right. And then I think the next most important thing to establish is what the fit would look like next to Jalen Brunson, who is a different player than Trae Young and certainly not as ball dominant, but does share some similarities. And when we've discussed the trade on our end of things, or like a theoretical trade for Dejounte Murray on our end of things, that's where I always get caught up, where I feel like it would be recreating the Julius, Jalen, RJ Barrett dynamic in some ways, a Blit with a much better player. But like I feel like it would be a little bit of dueling banjos, and my feel for what it's been on the Hawks has been a little bit of that. And now that fit, I think, has been made substantially better by the fact that he's having easily the best 3-point shooting season of his career, most attempts of his career, best percentage since his rookie season when he took like half a three per game. He's just for people who don't have the numbers, he's taking 6 per game this year, and he's hitting 38.3% of them, which is obviously awesome. So I guess what I'm getting at here is like, how do you think it would look with Jalen Brunson, and how real is the shooting? Because that would need to sustain for the Knicks to have interest in this move. If not, like if he's more so the 3-point shooter he's been for the bulk of his career, which the 4 years before this one, 32%, 33%, 34%, I think it makes a heck of a lot less sense for the Knicks to go and try and get him.
Yeah, it's really kind of ironic how parallel it kind of is even to Atlanta. Again, Trae and Jalen are not the same guy, but they have, they're both smaller point guards who have the ball a lot, and it's kind of the same theoretical fit in some ways. Like not only the defensive questions, which are certainly, we already talked about those, but offensively, I don't think that that's Murray's best role. Can it work? I think yes. I think even he and Trae have had nice flashes together to where like the Hawks have still been good offensively with those guys on the court. They've not been as good as they hoped that they would be, but it's not like it hasn't worked at all. It was a lot of your turn, my turn earlier in their tenure. Part of that was their coaching. Nate McMillan was kind of an old school guy and didn't really run a lot of like complementary sets with those guys. Quinn's gotten them going a little bit more playing off of each other, which has been more effective. I think ultimately the broad view I would give you is that I think Dejounte is going to be best somewhere where he's the point guard, and obviously that would not be the case in New York, nor is it the case in Atlanta, where the guys they have are just better than he is at running the offense and all that stuff. Now, Dejounte is a really, really talented scorer, which does help a lot. Like, he loves the mid-range, for better or worse, but he's one of those guys that's actually good enough at it where it doesn't kill you. You know what I mean? Some guys are in love with that mid-range shot, and it's kind of to their detriment. He's actually good at it. It can be frustrating, but he loves that shot. The three-point shooting has been an emphasis a lot in Atlanta, not only for him, but for the whole team under Snyder, and they've kind of gotten a lot more up as a team. And I do believe in the improvement there. I'm not sure he's a true talent 38% three-point shooter. Like, I'm not sure that's actually real, but I think he's better than he's ever been, if that makes sense. He's more confident taking them. He's looking for them more often. The catch and shoots are there. Because previous to this, he just didn't have a good feel for catch and shoot jumpers. Like he had to catch and hold. And look, his natural tendency is still a catch and hold. Like, he doesn't like to make quick decisions. He'll do it more now. I think he's been coached hard to do that in Atlanta by Snyder for about a year now. But I think his natural feel is to like catch, hold, observe, make his move, that kind of thing. He's not a quick guy like that. But when he lets it fly, it goes in. One of the challenges though with Dejounte is that, I know you're accurate in saying this has been his best season as a shooter. He's still a below average efficiency guy in every single season of his career, true shooting wise, because he doesn't really get to the line very often, and he doesn't really make a high percentage of his twos. Now, they're tough shots, so there's a lot to be said for that. But broadly speaking, he's not ever been an efficient shooter. It's gotten better. This year's his career best, and I wonder in New York if it would be even better than that. But I do wonder like where his real baseline is now, because I'm not sure 38% shooting for 3-point range is sustainable. And if that goes down to 35, yeah, taking more threes is good, and it definitely helps you, especially when you're a secondary player, but it's still not his best role. I will kind of go to the mat on that. Like, I still think that he wants to, deep down, be the guy, and also I think he's just more comfortable, and his skill set is more of a point guard who wants the ball all the time and makes decisions like that and operates like that.
Yeah, I think a big part of the Knicks calculus would be, all right, who are the even bigger names that we're targeting for like Leon Rose's like grand master plan, and how would Dejounte Murray fit on those teams? Because I do think he would ultimately be a stopgap for the New York Knicks, and that's where this trade maybe falls apart ultimately. Like, how many assets are you willing to give up for someone who's a stopgap? Is he going to be worth the equivalent of those assets on an extension that's pretty reasonable, if I'm remembering correctly, 4 years, $120 million, and like trading him like in the Knicks perfect dream world, the Sixers blow up, they get Joel Embiid, and Daryl Morey says, "Oh, Dejounte Murray and Tyrese Maxey, that's pretty good." But I look at all these teams, I'm like, all right, do they have a point guard in place that they think is better than Dejounte? And do they sort of think the same thing you're saying, and the same thing I've kind of been thinking from a Knicks perspective? Like, you get him, he's great, he's clearly an upgrade. Is he overqualified for what you want him to do and underqualified for what he wants to do? And I think that's sort of the rub, and that's why it's going to take a very specific team to trade for him, because I think what the Knicks are ultimately looking for is someone who can substantially elevate their second unit. And that would be, I don't know, in the playoffs, what is it, like 12 minutes a game where Dejounte gets to shine and gets to cook as the number one guy. But Jalen Brunson, like at that time of year under Tom Thibodeau, he's playing 36 to 40 minutes a game. And the majority of the time Dejounte is on the court, he's going to be the second, or like for long stretches, the third option. And I to your point, like he can do that. And obviously he can do that better than someone like Dante DiVincenzo. I'm just wondering if he's happy in that role. And if you're the Knicks, is that ultimately the right allocation of assets to get someone who's a fit, but not the quote unquote perfect fit for what you're giving up? So I guess where I'm going with that is, given what the Knicks, like that calculus for the Knicks and what they might be willing to give up, where do you kind of put them on the pecking order between teams like the Lakers, Nets, Spurs? I saw the Heat thrown out today. I'm sure there's 3 or 4 others that I haven't mentioned that you're well aware of, in terms of potentially trading for him. And like in your mind, like who's kind of the favorite to go and get him? All right, guys, we'll be back one final time to answer probably the most important question, arguably the one we could have and should have led the podcast with. Should the Knicks ultimately do this deal? We'll get to that in just a sec. But first, I got to tell you about our friends over at PrizePicks. So you might be at home asking, well, what is PrizePicks? Let me tell you, PrizePicks is the largest daily fantasy sport DFS platform in North America. Have you been living under a rock? What kind of question is that? We're the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League, a league created specifically for combo projections that include 2 or more players from different sports. For example, Jalen Brunson made threes and Travis Kelce receptions in the AFC Championship game, over under 10.5. I know I'm rolling with a big time over there, but you get to make your choice. Something even cooler than that, PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured for football and basketball games. If you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. I can't emphasize this enough. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. Seriously, if you know the pain of taking time and measures to make sure you put in the right projection and then for it to get killed by an injury, you know that pain. You know you want to roll with PrizePicks and never have that feeling again. So go to PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for first deposit match up to $100. Once again, that's PrizePicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use our code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, it's daily fantasy sports made easy at this point.
Yeah, and it's tough because there's like 2 different sets of rankings, right? It's like which teams have the stuff the Hawks would want, and which teams want Murray the most. You know what I mean? And also which teams need Murray the most. It's almost like there's 3 things. Like there are teams like Brooklyn or like Orlando that I think would be like the best basketball fit for Dejounte Murray. Like they just need a guy. Like Brooklyn would love to have Dejounte Murray, I feel like, because like they don't have a guy that can do that what he does. You know what I mean? Orlando, same thing. They don't have a guy in the backcourt that does that. But they haven't been, at least in what I've heard and what's been reported so far, as eager that I've heard to go get him. Then you have the Lakers, who I think are the favorite, as you and I are talking right now. Based on what I've heard, based on what's been reported, they obviously want him. They don't have a lot to offer, is the thing with the Lakers. That's a very familiar refrain with the Lakers. Everyone's tied to the Lakers. He's a clutch client, which we could even talk about or not. The CAA clutch thing is very much out there. It's been reported, talked about. I don't know how much that's going to matter, if at all. But like, I think that if he gets traded as we record this, I would say the Lakers are the favorite, but only because I think that they are actively the one that's like pushing hardest for him, from what I've heard. But they don't have a lot to offer. Like, so the Knicks have more attractive assets than the Lakers do to the Hawks. I have to think that. It's just whether the Knicks are willing to trade those assets. And then you have teams like San Antonio, who has the Hawks picks they could send back, at least some of them, probably not all of them. Yeah, it's kind of a morass of teams, and I think that the Lakers have separated themselves a little bit as far as the likelihood is concerned. But for the Knicks, it really does come down to this is something you probably would even know more than I would. It's like, what is their? I don't. We all know they have interests, but how much interest and how willing are they to kind of push in? Because the combination of Fournier as an expiring matching salary is probably attractive to the Hawks, a team that watches their books a lot, and they have a lot of future money coming up. Being able to shed that money would be helpful. They have picks to offer. They have Quentin Grimes, all that stuff. Like, it kind of makes sense as an offer. It's just whether the Knicks are like eager enough to go ahead and throw that stuff out there. Because if they wanted him, if the Knicks decided, hey, we're gonna go get Dejounte Murray at all costs, they would be able to do it. I think we kind of know that. Whereas the Lakers, I'm less sure of that. Even if they put everything on the table, I'm not 100% sure they would get him. So it's like, it's this weird dynamic of the Hawks are reportedly asking for two first round picks. That's maybe a variable thing based on what else you can offer. Like, if you're trying to attach bad money, then yeah, definitely two first round picks. If it's like a pick and an asset, like for instance a Quentin Grimes, something like that, maybe that's more attractive. I don't know, but they are going to want something considerable. They're not going to give him away for free. That's one of those things that like everyone assumes that once a guy's available, it's like, well, they're definitely going to trade him for nothing. Well, no, they're going to trade him for something good, or they're not going to trade him. That's what it is. So that's a long rambling answer, but it's definitely different schools of Hawks interest, Hawks desire versus like also Murray plays a part here. Whether you want that to happen, this is the real NBA behind the scenes is like, yes, he's signed on an extension for 4 years. I don't think the Hawks are going to trade Dejounte Murray to somewhere where he would be throwing a fit to go there. That's just the reality of the situation. It very rarely happens with this level of player that guy goes to a spot that he doesn't want to go. Like, it has happened, you know what I mean? But agents are powerful, especially when you have probably one of the most powerful agents in the league in Clutch / Rich Paul behind Dejounte Murray. Like, I don't think he's going to get sent to places that he doesn't want to go. So that's part of this too.
Yeah, it always. I mean, you didn't see Charlotte dumping 10 first-round picks for Kevin Durant last year for a reason. I think because
yeah.
It ultimately, like, you just end up in the same situation.
You need buy-in. I mean, these guys are human beings, and if they don't want to be there, yeah, they'll show up and play. Most guys are they won't. Most guys are not going to hold out. You know what I mean? But you're not going to get the best out of a guy unless he wants to be there.
Of course. And presumably most guys want to be in New York to some extent or another. With Dejounte, like, my question would be like is his grander priority versus a market like getting to be the point guard? And then to your point, like Brooklyn, Orlando in particular makes like an immense amount of sense for him, even with all the morass of guards they have there. Like, he would be such a good fit with Paolo and Franz. But from a Knicks perspective, in terms of what they would give up, I think something in the framework of a first round pick, Quinn Grimes, Evan Fournier, probably is the trade. It was reported by the Athletics, Fred Katz. The Knicks are actively like listening to offers on Quentin Grimes right now, and just based on him not being upgraded in the rotation, despite the fact that they traded two guys out and really brought in only one substantially used perimeter piece in OG Anunoby. Like, Grimes is, if anything, played less after that. So that's been a pretty clear sign he's on the outs with the Knicks. I personally disagree with that. I really love him as a player. I think he would be really great in Atlanta and like a very clean fit next to Trae Young with how talented of a passer is, and the fact that Grimes hasn't developed very much as an on-the-ball guy. Like, I don't think that would be nearly as much of an issue playing with Young as it's been on the Knicks, who are trying to use him more as a bench scorer, and I think maybe had hopes that he would be a little bit more of a bench creator. I think where this would break down or come down to is how valuable the first round pick. Atlanta would presumably want that, and correct me if I'm off on this, Brad, I would think they'd want that pick to be as far out as possible, or at least 3-4 years out, versus like this year's pick from the Knicks, which is obviously not going to be all that great. The Knicks would maybe try to barter over having like a little bit of protection on it, or sending out like two lesser first round picks, like whether it's the Pistons pick that's protected, but I actually do think is decently valuable and eventually will convey as something like the 12th or 13th pick in the draft, combined with like the Wizards pick that's pretty heavily projected. It might not convey, or the Bucks pick that's top 5 protected. Like, the Knicks would maybe try to get away with two of those instead of like a true blue unprotected first round pick. And I wonder if Atlanta feels, all right, then we'll just go with the Lakers and we'll get this super valuable, what is it, 2029, 2030 pick that the Lakers can deal, that we think would have good reason to think could be a top 5, top 10 pick. So that is what this ultimately comes down to for me. And on the Knicks end, in terms of whether you want to go that extra mile to go and get him, like, is the idealized version of Dejounte Murray realistic? And after having this conversation with you, Brad, and based on my own inclinations, I think not, because I think if the Knicks were like, all right, we are getting the ultimate 3-and-D plus guy, they're like, yeah, sign me up. That's a clear-cut upgrade. Like, it does give us like a puncher's chance in the East this year. If we're getting someone who sees himself as more, and just the fact that like he's not super happy playing the role we're going to ask him to play, like limits the functional utility of all of his talent. I think the Knicks are like, you know what, if we're going to lose in the second round in 5 games versus 7 games, like let's just save our gunpowder for a future deal.
Yeah, I think that all makes sense. I would be in the same spot. I having watched Dejounte the last year and a half, he's a really good player. That's something I think I get. People think that I'm like super low on, and I'm not. Like I think it's more that I'm low on his defense because it's been harmful at times. But like I think he can ramp it up. And I just don't love the fit in New York. I don't hate it. It's not like it's untenable. Whereas, like, if the Knicks traded for Dejounte Murray as a non-Hawks, like, put the Hawks stuff aside, I would be like, okay, I at least get why they would do that. You know what I mean? He does have the rep on defense. He does give them another guy that can handle the ball and score. And the contract, like you said, is very reasonable. Like, I know it was the most the Hawks could offer him legally, but like people have said, max. It's not even close to the max. Like he got the maximum allowed offer. But it's not a max contract. It's a good value for what he actually is. It's just that if you're the Knicks and you're trying to hold your powder, like you said, like this is kind of it's not an all-in swing on him, but it's a use some real asset swing on a guy who's going to be making a lot of money in the future. And going back to the Hawks for a second, like it's funny because the Knicks have such wiggle room on all these picks that they have coming in, and they have their own picks. So it's like the negotiation could be very complicated. If you're the Hawks, maybe you're looking for 2 of them, but like you're not going to get 2 good ones. Like it's going to be maybe you get 1 decent one, and maybe the Pistons pick. All those things, like there's that conversation. Whereas the Hawks draft picks are like they have 1 they can offer, and that's it. It's just this very interesting, and the Kings pick, I guess. But no, I can see them talking. I can see the Knicks drawing a line in the sand, as most teams should in negotiations, and saying, this is going to be our offer and take it or leave it. I don't know if the Hawks are going to get there or not. And if I was the Knicks, I would not break the bank for Murray. I wouldn't if I was the Knicks. Now, they're not going to listen to me. Sometimes you'll probably find this funny. I had a discussion on my podcast about the Knicks, and I basically was advocating the Knicks probably shouldn't do this. And Hawks fans were like mad at me that I said that, and they were going to like hear me deflecting on Dejounte's defense. I'm like, I promise you, Leon Rose, who doesn't talk to anyone in the media anyway, does not listen to my podcast. But I probably wouldn't push all the chips in. I do think that if it was like, Grimes, Fournier, and a first, that's a reasonable deal to do. Like if you're the Knicks, like I get it. If the Hawks want more than that, and if I'm the Hawks, I ask for more than that. Doesn't mean you're going to get more than that, but I would ask for more because like you could just say, hey, this guy's an all-star. He's averaging this and this and this and all that stuff. Good contract. There is a deal to be had here. I don't know that it's going to happen. I would guess it doesn't with any single team. Even if it was the Lakers, you just said yes or no, I would say no. It's just that I think that it's plausible. Like, and I'm not sure how the front office feels. I mean, it's hard because they don't talk to anybody anyway, but it's like, how all in do you need to be to go get Dejounte Murray, who we agree on this discussion is not a perfect fit. And I think perfect is the enemy of good sometimes. Like sometimes you can be fine with that. I think that he would work there. He would make them better. He's better than the guys they have, like you said earlier. It's just that it's a big bullet to fire for a guy who's making $30 million moving forward. And if you're going to go ahead and do that, you got to be sure.
Yeah, I do think just on paper, Brunson, Dejounte, OG, Randall, and whether it's Hardenstein or Mitchell Robinson back in the lineup. I mean, the defensive potential of that lineup's really good. The offensive potential of that, there's a world where it clicks, and they do
have OG in a way the Hawks do not. By the way, that actually would help them. That's the one major difference. Not to cut you off, but OG is the guy the Hawks wish they had. And I do wonder if having OG there would be better for the fit in New York than it's been in Atlanta.
Yeah, because I think we've seen him have almost like a Pied Piper effect defensively for the Knicks, where you watch him defend and you're like, oh, I want to go and do that too. And it's why I've been begging for the Knicks to give him and Grimes some minutes together, because I think that would just be terrifying in the playoffs if you got that clicking and working at the right time. And I think Dejounte would at least have the potential to replicate what Quentin Grimes brings defensively and offensively. I mean, it's 3 guys who shoot the ball really well. Randall, who like in the right series could get hot, and all of a sudden like the Knicks have some real spacing in a way they haven't in the past. And obviously Dejounte is a slight downgrade from DiVincenzo just from a spacer perspective, because DiVincenzo has been one of the best shooters in the league, but with everything he brings as a secondary creator and bringing their bench probably back to one of the better bench units in the league, there are real reasons to do it for the Knicks. And I don't want to just seem like I'm a total downer on it, because like you, like I think I'd very quickly talk myself into it if the move actually happened. There's just enough there to give you pause that I don't think it ultimately goes down. But if it does, Brad, we will have you right back on this podcast, and I will pretend this conversation never happened. I will say, you know what, from day one, I was all in.
Yeah, we'll dig right in. I'll give you all of what you need about his defense, and just be like, you know what, he'll go definitely back to what he was in San Antonio as soon as he gets traded from Atlanta. No, the nihilistic Hawks fan in me from way back in the day, before I lost my fandom entirely almost from covering basketball, would be like, it'd be very Hawks if Dejounte went to anywhere, much less the Knicks, but we'll just say the Knicks here, and immediately was defending like he was in San Antonio. It would be quite on brand in a lot of ways.
Well, I'm going to hope that happens.
For
Brad Rowland, I'm Gavin Schall. Brad, before I let you go, I'm just for all the Knicks fans listening, can you tell everyone where they can find all your great work?
Yeah, appreciate it. You can find me on Twitter/X. I'm not sure how you refer to it on your show. I always go Twitter, but it is what it is. At BT Rowland. I am the host of Locked On Hawks podcast, and that's the place to find me. So check it out. Appreciate it.
I'm a Twitter man myself. Brad Rowland, Gavin Schall. We'll talk to you very, very soon on both Locked On Knicks and Locked On Hawks.